In the military summary channel. In this video we're going to discuss the most important events that took place during the previous 12 hours. We have lots of very interesting updates, so let's start. And first we're going to talk about the conflict on the territory of Ukraine, and we will begin with the situation in the Black Sea. Now we see that the Ukrainian side and the United States of America are making steps with the purpose to normalize the situation in the Black Sea and probably to allow both the Russians and the Ukrainians to use the Black Sea for their purposes. But there is a very important situation, and the importance of the situation is that since the beginning of April or May of 2026, the Ukrainians damaged and destroyed dozens, maybe hundreds of Russian vessels. And of course, this is not the situation when the Russians are going to be very happy. For example, if tomorrow a deal happens between Russia and Ukraine on the matter of normalization of the situation in the Black Sea, we will see the situation when the Ukrainians hit hundreds of Russian vessels and the Russians just dozens. Of course, this is not something that the Russians like, and this is exactly what the Western countries and Ukraine are trying to achieve right now. But the problem is that the Ukrainians didn't realize, and they didn't know that the Russians are going to use something new when talking about the Odessa region, and we will discuss this in a minute. So what kind of steps the Western countries have already made on this matter? These days we start receiving lots of reports from the Western countries, from the Western media, that Trump administration warned Ukraine not to hit on Russian vessels in the Black Sea after Chevron and other industry players raised concerns. So as you can see, this is a very important message from the United States of America, and this is something like a message that it's time to stop any activity through the Black Sea and it's time to start negotiations. And today we receive a reply to this message, and this reply was made not by the president of Russia himself or by any other, let's say, Russian political, but this reply, the answer we received from the president of Kazakhstan, Tokayev, because he had a meeting today with the president of Russia, Putin, and today he said that young people are dying. This is the gene pool of the brotherly peoples of Russia and Ukraine, and all this must be stopped because what is happening, in my convinced view, plays into the hands and brings joy to the enemies of both Russia and Ukraine. So the president of Kazakhstan, one of the nearest allies of Russia, asked Putin to stop the special military operation and to begin negotiations. Obviously, he was talking as if he was talking about the entire special military operation, but basically he was talking about the Black Sea Truce or the Black Sea ceasefire. Because according to information we have, currently the state of Kazakhstan is in the situation, as we can see, states in the Middle East due to the situation with the Strait of Hormuz. Kazakhstan's oil export problem is at least as big as that of Gulf producers Iraq, Kuwait, and Qatar at the moment. Around 80% of Kazakh crude export depends on the CPC, a road which passes through Russia, ending in the port of Novorossiysk, while alternative corridors can absorb only a fraction of its roughly 1.7 million. So Kazakhstan, the main export terminal for Kazakhstan is the city of Novorossiysk, but we know that these days the Ukrainians almost every single day publish video when they attack this or that vessel or tanker, which means that currently nobody can use the Black Sea in commercial purposes. But once again, the situation is that we see that both the Russians and the Ukrainians through Kazakhstan and the United States of America are ready for the negotiations, but the main problem is that we see that Ukrainians destroyed and hit hundreds of Russian vessels and the Russians just dozens. And when talking about this formula, when talking about this ratio and this balance, of course, the Ukrainians are very happy with this situation, despite the fact that many vessels and tankers were attacked and destroyed by the Russians as well. Every single day we receive videos how Russians attack Ukrainian tanks and vessels, tankers and vessels that are moving either in the direction of the city of Odessa or from the territory of Odessa. But the problem is that the main problem that Ukraine is going to face these days is the gap. The gap between the current day, the 25th of July of 2026, and the moment when a deal is being signed. So now the time works in the Russian favor. Now everybody knows, both the Russians and the Americans and the Ukrainians and the Kazakhstanians and many other different players of the Black Sea, that we will see the Black Sea deal most likely somewhere before summer comes, somewhere before September of 2026. And the only question is that right now nobody is going to stop attacking each other. And the most important problem for Ukrainian side is that the Ukrainians have possibilities to attack vessels, but most likely nobody is going to use the Black Sea during the next months. So which means that both the Russians and the Ukrainians and the Western countries will be able to save their assets and their vessels and so on. And the Ukrainians from their side are not able to deal damage to the Russia's port infrastructure. They can attack different facilities with drones, but this will not damage. But at the same time, we see that the Russians started using something new when talking about the Black Sea region. Today, the Russians, for the first time since the beginning of the special military operation, attacked the city of Odessa, the city of Chernomorsk, and the port infrastructure with bombs. So the Russians, during the previous days, were always attacking the Odessa region, for example, with Geran drones. The Russians were attacking this region with Banderol cruise missiles. The Russians were attacking this territory probably with Iskander missiles. And of course, all these types of weapons are able to deal significant damage to infrastructure of Odessa, but we understand that this cannot be compared with the damage that the Russian bombs can deal to the Odessa infrastructure. And for example, during the previous 24 hours, we received at least 2 reports from the Russian side that the Russians 2 times during the previous 24 hours, during the 25th of July of 2026, attacked the area of Odessa with 2 Su-34 and 1 Su-35 that was protecting those Su-34s. The Russians were moving along these roads of attack. The Russians, according to information we have, during the previous 24 hours, 2 times approached the shore of the Odessa region, let's say somewhere in the to this point, and from these positions the Russians were bombing with real bombs the Chernomorsk infrastructure. So this is the situation. We see that first of all, the Ukrainians don't have air defense means capable to bring down the Russian aircrafts in this part of the Black Sea. This is the first thing. And the second thing we need to understand, if there is a time between the 25th of July and the moment when a deal is being signed, if there is a gap, if there is a, let's say, if there are 20-30 days, this means that if the Russians every single day use bombs to attack the Odessa port infrastructure, this means that during this period of time, the Russians would be able to reduce significantly the Ukraine's export capabilities. And when a deal is being signed, then the Russians will leave as the winners from this Black Sea duel of the summer military campaign. And the Ukrainians would be forced to invest lots of money and resources to restore the port infrastructure, while the Russians will have possibilities to continue sending oil, sending products through the Black Sea and through the port infrastructure of the southern region. So this is the situation. Once again, today the Russians 2 times attacked the Odessa region where the FABs. So this is a very important situation. They haven't. This is the first time they did this, and most likely the Russians will continue. During the previous 24 hours, during the first attack, the Russians used 4 bombs. 2 of them were intercepted by the Ukrainian side, and the Ukrainians were using lots of interceptors for these purposes. But 2 bombs managed to hit the Chernomorsk infrastructure. Probably 3 or 4 hours later, the Russians launched another wave of attack, and during the second wave of attack, the Russians once again managed to deal damage to the port infrastructure of the Odessa region. So this is a significant escalation. This is a significant change in the warfare of the Black Sea region, and this is the moment when the Russians return the initiative completely in their hands. When talking about vessels, when talking about ships, when talking about this situation, another important thing, according to information we have today, the European countries allowed the European Union, European Union will allow the sale of seized Russian oil. The European Union will allow the sale of cargoes from ships of the so-called Russian Shadow Fleet seized during different operations in different seas around the European Union. So this is another important situation, and most likely, if this law was adopted, this means that everything is ready to make a first step in this situation. Now let's move further and let's talk about the yesterday's attack. If you remember, yesterday the Russians attacked the Kyiv agglomeration with dozens of Iskander missiles. The Russians were attacking this territory, and the Ukrainian authorities stated that there were casualties among civilians. There were lots of injured, up to 100 people were injured, according to official Ukrainian data. But today, several sources familiar with the situation reported that the Ukrainian authorities published wrong numbers. According to information we have, there were around between 200 and 1,000 people in this area, and when the Russians were attacking this territory, there were lots of important people. There were developers, there were CEOs of different organizations, there were military, there were special forces, and so on. And the sources reported that there are around 300 casualties among civilians. And during the previous 24 hours, we were receiving lots of updates on the matter of casualties between different people, different politicals. Furthermore, according to information we have, there was even a person from Poland who worked on some Polish defense company. He was there, and he is also in the list of casualties from that attack. So the attack through the western parts of the Kyiv agglomeration, according to information we have, probably was a very powerful one. And as you can see, there are not just 100 of people as casualties. Much more people suffered as a result of this attack that was carried out by Russians. Now let's move further and let's discuss the situation with attacks. During the previous 24 hours, the Russians used around 200 of air means to attack the territory of Ukraine, and the Russians once again shift their focus from warehouses to gas stations. During the previous 24 hours, lots of gas stations were destroyed through the Poltava region. The sources reported that at least 3 gas stations were destroyed along MO3 road, and here we have pictures of the consequences of attack. Furthermore, we have a video published by pro-Russian sources. This one, the video has 120 seconds length, and here we can see lots of episodes, probably dozens of episodes of how Russians were attacking gas stations through the Sumy, Kharkiv, and Chernihiv region. So dozens of gas stations, dozens of additional gas stations were destroyed by Russians, and we see that the Russians accelerate this process with the purpose to destroy every single gas station through the eastern parts of Ukraine, especially to the east of the river of Dnipro, and through the southern parts of Ukraine along the river of Dnipro as well. So this is the situation, and today we received the report that more than 300 of gas stations were destroyed by Russians, and we have this picture that we have already discussed during the previous video, and here we have every single gas station that was destroyed through the region of Dnipro. I counted more than 70 gas stations that were destroyed, and the most important thing that the Russians are going to continue this process, and they will try to finish with gas stations before probably winter comes to these territories. Now let's move further and let's discuss the situation on the ground. During the previous 24 hours, the Russians have improved their position significantly through the Kharkiv direction, and these are the changes on the ground between the dates. So if you remember, just yesterday the Russians stated that they captured the settlement of Zakharovka and Anishina, and today the map has been adjusted once again. The Russians continue advancing. Right now the Ukrainians are trying to organize defense in this area between the western and the eastern flanks, and we see that the Russians are keeping advancing. The Russians continue offensive operation towards the T-2104 road with the purpose to cut this road physically and to cut another supply line to the city of Belakolodets. At the same time, the group of forces north reported that these days very heavy clashes also were recorded through the villages of Pilne and Shevchenkova. The Russians are trying to encircle the settlement of Belakolodets without heavy battles, heavy fights on the territory of the city itself. The Russians are trying to force the Ukrainians to fall back from the settlement, but it's a very important situation to see what kind of decision the commander-in-chief of the armed forces of Ukraine, Drapat, is going to make about this, because today, for example, several pro-Russian sources stated that for the first time since Drapati took his position, first cauldron was created by Russians, has been created by Russians, and up to 1,000 of Ukrainian soldiers were encircled. Most likely he was talking, these sources were talking about the situation in the area of the city of Konstantinovka, but it seems that the situation around the city of Belakolodets could be the same. Another cauldron could be created, and the question is what Drapati is going to do with this. Either he will give an order to fall back from these territories. Syrskyi would never do this, and maybe he will change his position, but sometimes he is not the only one who makes decisions. Zelensky also have some voice in this question. And the Russians, as you can see, continue advancing in the direction of these pockets from the northwest, and the Russians continue offensive operation in the same direction also from the northeast. And it seems that by the end of the summer of 2026, the most northeastern parts of the Kharkiv region will collapse, and then the Russians will continue offensive operation further in the direction of the village of Veliki Burluk. But it seems that Ukrainians will not be able to hold their positions for a very long period of time through this settlement. Now let's talk about the Barova direction. During the previous 24 hours, we received lots of videos. And you know that when talking about videos, when talking about FPV drone strikes, let's say through the eastern flank of the city of Slaviansk, or FPV drone strikes somewhere in the Zaporozhye direction, during these FPV drone attacks, we can see only attacks on Ukraine's positions and on Ukraine soldiers that are moving in this area. But when talking about the Barova direction, during the previous days, we received dozens of videos, and the most important thing that all these videos are about how Russians attack Ukrainian vehicles. So which means, and this confirms that indeed the Ukrainians managed to concentrate lots of armored vehicles in this area, and now the Ukrainians are trying to use these armored vehicles with the purpose to counterattack and to force the Russians to fall back from the northern flank of the Slaviansk agglomeration, and the Ukrainians are tasked to unblock the city of Liman. But the problem is that today is not 2022. The Russians show fierce resistance, and the Russians are holding their lines, but at the same time we don't receive almost anything, neither from pro-Russian sources nor from pro-Ukrainian sources about the situation on the ground, which means that currently nobody can claim that the initiative is in their hands. The Slaviansk direction, the Russians continue offensive operation. As we discussed, it seems that the Russians encircled up to 1,000 of Ukrainian soldiers in this area. Furthermore, the Russians, according to different sources, answered the settlement of Osikova, and currently the clashes are taking place on the territory of this settlement, and the Russians continue advancing. Furthermore, we see that the Russians intensify their FPV drone activities to the north of the settlement of Priyuk, through the southwestern flank of the settlement of Drushkovka. During the previous 24 hours, so lots of videos were published from this area, which means that the Russians began softening defenses of the armed forces of Ukraine before the beginning of the major offensive operation, with the purpose to answer the southwestern parts of the city of Drushkovka from the southwestern direction. As for the Dobropolye direction, during the previous 24 hours, we haven't received anything special, just two episodes with Russians that were raising the Russian flag in the most central part of the settlement. We received confirmations that indeed the Russians captured the settlement of Belitskaya. As for the Zaporozhye direction, during the previous 24 hours, we haven't received anything special. Probably the most important updates concern the city of Zaporozhye itself, because during the previous 24 hours, the Russians attacked the city with aviation, with missiles, and with drones. And as a result of attack, the Russians destroyed this territory. This is something like a central market. There are lots of facilities, lots of warehouses, as you can see. And as a result of attack, this territory, as you can see, was reduced to ruins from the Russian side. Furthermore, during the same period of time, the Russians also attacked the territory to the north, in the northern parts of the city of Zaporozhye. We're talking about these facilities. As you can see, there is a enterprise with the trucks in this area, and as a result of attack, as you can see, this territory was also badly damaged, which means that the Russians most likely received intelligent information that the Ukrainians were using these facilities to upgrade trucks so they could be served as drone carriers. As for the western parts of the Dnipro direction of Dnipro region, the Russians attacked a gas pumping station, and in this video we see the moments, a few seconds after the Russians attacked this facility with a drone. A fire broke out immediately. So we see that the Russians seems adapted to new tactics of Ukraine. Yes, the Ukrainians continue attacking deep inside of the territory of Russia, but it seems that the Russians managed partially to adapt to the situation. As for the previous 24 hours, the Ukrainians used hundreds of drones to attack the territory of Russia, and the Ukrainians were mainly attacking in the direction of the central part of Russia. According to information we have, the Ukrainians attacked the city of Belgrade, the city of Saratov and Engels, and as you can see today, the Russians were using the Engels airfield to attack the territory of Odessa with bombs. The Ukrainians tried to attack the city of Yekaterinburg and another warehouse, but as for the city, the Russians managed to repel this attack, and the Russians managed to save that warehouse. The Ukrainians launched drones even further in the northeastern direction and attacked the city of Tyumen, and as for the city of Tyumen, it seems that the Ukrainians managed to hit the Tyumen oil refinery, and during the day we received lots of videos where we can see a fire broke out from the oil refinery, which means that the Ukrainians managed to deal significant damage. Most likely the Russians will be forced to suspend the activities of this oil refinery for some period of time until they repair this facility. The Ukrainians since the beginning of June of 2026 made 3 attempts to attack this refinery. The previous 2 attempts were repelled by Russians, but we see that this one, the third attempt, was successful for the Ukrainian side, and they managed to deal significant damage to this area. Another important thing, the Russians accelerates the process of creation of the analog of the Starlink. Today, 16 new Rassvet satellites have appeared on tracking resources. It's still the Russians don't have enough of satellites to compete with the SpaceX, with Starlink system and so on, but the Russians are trying to improve their situation, and most likely by the end of this year we will see lots of satellites of Rassvet on the Russian side, and most likely the Russians would be able to create a stable connection along the entire line of combat contact. Of course, we know that the Western countries and the United States of America, Starlink, SpaceX have already begun launching the satellites of the 3rd generation, and the Russians are very far behind of this situation, but we see that the Russians are trying to improve this situation as fast as possible. And that's it for today.